All right, folks, coming to you with my last recap. Last night was the season premiere for Alone Season 9, and I think overall it's been a fantastic season, and they wrapped it up with a really good finale. We were down to Temujin, Carrie Lee, and Juan Pablo, and this episode starts off with Temujin out collecting firewood. So you can see how tired, worn down Temujin is, how drained he is of energy, and just the smallest tasks of walking 100 feet and snapping a few branches off of the trees and collecting a little bit of firewood just absolutely drains you. He mentions at one point that about 45 minutes or so of work is about all he can do in an entire day. I remember kind of early November-ish on season 8 when I was processing firewood. I was actually cutting pretty good sized trees, lodgepole that was, 6 to 8 inches diameter or so. I'd made a rack to hold these logs up, kind of like a cross buck, so that I could process this firewood with my saw. And I remember just working that saw back and forth, and I could get about 5 strokes or so before I'd have to stop and just recover for a little bit. And in a situation like that where you don't, you can rest, but you're not recovering really. You're just kind of slowing the decline a little bit. And so once you start getting to that point, it's just a slow decline that it's difficult to recover from. Temujin also talks about clarity. He talks about how he feels like this experience has made him a better person. He also talks about the importance of family, that universal truth that it seems like just about everybody that goes out and does this eventually comes to, especially when they start to face that extreme adversity. I think it's impossible to go into this thing and stay out there for a long time and not somehow come out different than you went in. So Temujin didn't leave with the $500,000, but I think he would agree when I say that I really think that he left with something much, much more valuable, and that's a deeper understanding of ourselves and how we relate to the people around us. And so now we'll talk about the intrepid spirit of Carrie Lee. It seems like nothing can get this gal down. She seems incredibly, incredibly tough, and I have been repeatedly impressed by her attitude, even in the face of extreme adversity, of starvation, cold, things just not working out the way that we would want them to. She seems like she's maintaining good spirits, and she continues to have fun. She talks about her motivations and the things that keep her out there and keep her going. And one of the things she mentions is this wilderness school that she wants to start. And she talks about how the prize money would help her do that, help her pay off her debts, and to start this school. She also keeps her friend Colette in mind, a friend that is battling cancer. And I think this is very important because it gives you a perspective on your own situation when you're out there. I think it's important to keep that in mind, that no matter how bad it sucks, no matter how bad the cold gets or the wet or how hungry you are, that there's always people out there who have battled and overcome things that are far, far worse. And this is something that I really tried to keep in mind when I was out there. And one of the things that I kept going back to was Viktor Frankl's A Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read that book, I would highly, highly recommend it. So Viktor Frankl was a survivor of the Holocaust, spent a long time in the Nazi concentration camps, and he recalls his experiences there and all of the unimaginable horrors that they endured. That's the first part of the book. And then the second part, he's a psychologist. He analyzes the mental processes of the people who survived and didn't. And so having those things in mind just helps you to bring yourself out of your own misery and self-pity and just kind of gives you a perspective so that you can say, you know what, no matter how bad it gets out here, it's really not that bad. So Carrie Lee eventually ends up finding some hair tracks, and I'm, watching this whole series, even after the snow comes, I'm really kind of surprised at how little hair sign people are seeing. And maybe they are seeing it and we're just not being shown the hair sign, but it looks like good rabbit or hare habitat, and so that's I've been kind of surprised about that. But Carrie Lee eventually gets so weak that she can't draw her bow. And when she gets to that point, she eventually comes to the realization that she probably isn't going to be able to continue. And there's a scene in there, the scene where Carrie Lee finally comes to that realization and decides to call it in. This is one of the great things about Alone. This is one of the things that really sets this show apart. The survival aspect of it is great. All of the builds that people do is great. All of those things are interesting. But in my mind, the thing that sets Alone apart is that it makes you empathize with these people. It makes you feel something. And in TV, that's not an easy thing to accomplish. And I think that that's something that the producers really do a good job with, is giving the viewers a front seat view to watching these people face extreme adversity and watching how they deal with this physically, emotionally, and it kind of draws you in. And if you can watch that scene where Carrie Lee finally ends up tapping out and not get emotional, something's wrong. All right, and that finally brings us to Juan Pablo. And the first thing that we see of Juan Pablo is the challenges that the weather are bringing. And this is something that's kind of pretty standard for the coastal regions. You'll get cold weather, a bunch of snow, and then you'll have a warm front move in, and it starts raining, and all of the snow melts off, and it's just slushy and nasty. We had the same type of thing on Chilco Lake up in BC. And that's challenging on a number of fronts. It makes trapping hard because it's hard to set your snares if you are snaring, because if you set them on the ground or down low, it snows, covers them all up like Carrie Lee was seeing. And then if you set them up high where the rabbit runs or squirrel runs are, snow melts away, then you've got your snare, a foot up in the air and it's not catching anything. And so it's a constant battle having to kind of keep on top of the elements like that. The other thing is that's just cold. I would rather be out in 0 degree, dry, cold weather than 20 degrees when it's raining and slushy, and it's just that kind of cold just kind of seeps into your bones, and it's hard to get warm with that humidity in the air. So one of the things that Juan Pablo did that I really liked and that I also did was setting milestones. And he builds a fire in his stove. And I think it's the first time he's actually built a fire in this stove since he built it way back at the beginning of the show. He ended up using paint cans with some paint residue in there, and it puts off toxic fumes in his shelter, and he ends up having to rebuild it. But that's beside the point. What I wanted to talk about was the milestone thing. And so setting milestones and then having those rewards when you meet those milestones. To me, that says he set that milestone early on. And so to me, that says long-term commitment. He's not just going through this, seeing how things go. He's looking way off into the future and saying, okay, if I can make it today, whatever it was, 68 or something like that, I'm going to build this fire and that's going to be my reward. And another thing that he's looking forward to is ice up, so he can get out and go for a walk on that freeze up. So one of the things that I did was when I killed that deer, the shanks, the lower part of the legs, I smoked whole. And one of those shanks, the rear shank, I kept whole, hanging from the rafter in my shelter there, all the way until it was Thanksgiving. It was like day 70 or something like that. And so I had this this milestone and this reward for way off into the future. I think I killed that deer on day 21 or 22, something like that. And so I had this reward that I wouldn't get until way deep into the season. But I think that's important to have those little milestones and rewards. It just gives you something to look forward to. So there's a couple of scenes in there where Juan Pablo is processing firewood, and the first scene is he's putting his axe on a piece of wood and he smacks it with his mallet, and he talks about being, textbook safe. And then a couple of scenes later, we see him doing something that he knows he shouldn't do. He's holding a piece of wood with his axe on top of it, tapping it like that, and he nearly cuts himself. And I can't remember who it was, but somebody on one of the previous seasons one of the gals had cut her thumb and went home doing that exact same thing. That's a great way to cut yourself. Juan Pablo knows that. And the reason I bring this up is in that state, you're half starved, you're malnourished, and that starts to mess with your decision making. Like I said, Juan Pablo knows that he shouldn't have done that, and he knows instantly when that axe bit grazes his thumb that he could have really screwed up there. So the remaining two, Carrie Lee and Juan Pablo, they're both having trouble sleeping. They're both talking about this. And this is something that I experienced late in my season as well. I remember one night I was up at I just couldn't sleep. And so I got up at 2 a.m. and started carving. And I think I was working on that dovetail box that I made, just insetting the bottom or something like that. I don't know exactly why they're having trouble sleeping, but for me, I think the big thing was, first of all, the days are very short. You got 7-8 hours of daylight, and so you got super long nights. On top of that, you're trying to conserve energy, so you're being as inactive as possible, and so you spend a lot of time just kind of laying around in your sleeping bag. And so I don't know, you just get on this weird sleep cycle, and it manifests itself in waking up in the middle of the night at odd hours and working on various projects. Just kind of makes it hard to function throughout the day. And so Juan Pablo ended up doing it. He outlasted everyone else. He's got the skills, the body type, and the resolve to do it. So his girlfriend comes up behind him and gives him probably the biggest surprise of his life, and I'm glad that they got to experience that together. At the end of my season, this was right in the middle of COVID. The borders were shut down, and so unfortunately Liz was not able to come up to Canada and be there with me. I wish she could have been there and got to see the place that I spent 2.5 months, but just wasn't to be. So for the viewers watching this from home, you might look at this and see all of these people that go out there and they don't win, and you might think that this is a huge waste of time, and they go through all of this suffering for no reason. But I seriously doubt that you would find any participant that would say that same thing. I think that nearly everyone who goes out there and stays for a good chunk of time sees this as a very valuable experience and is grateful to have had the opportunity to go out and do this. All right, that is going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed the recaps and all of the survival/bow making videos that I've been putting out. But it is middle of August. The hunting season is just around the corner, and good thing because our freezer is getting very, very low. We're actually down to our last few packs of elk meat. And so we're going to start doing some bow hunting here before long. So stay tuned, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and we'll take y'all on the adventures. See you next time.